So we come up this week on the national holiday that we set aside to celebrate our freedom. But when I turn on the news and I scroll through my Facebook feed and I walk around the streets of LA, I'm not sure it's freedom that I see. So it makes me wonder if we know what freedom really is, what it looks like, what it sounds like. Like, if freedom were on that show, The Voice, where all the judges turn their chairs around and judge the contestants based only on how they sound, would we know freedom's voice? Or going back a few years, if we were on Name That Tune, how many notes would it take for us to name freedom's tune? Well, in this passage, Paul tells the Galatians that they do not know what freedom is, they don't know what it looks like, they don't know what it sounds like, and he's going to tell them. As some of you know from studying Galatians just recently in the Bible study with Pastor Bill, Paul's comments on freedom here are really bound up in an argument against some preachers who got to the Galatians after Paul had already converted them. Those preachers had apparently convinced the people that they needed to be circumcised, that they needed to follow Jewish law in order to be saved under Christ. And then the Galatians seem to have assumed that because they were saved by law, they could indulge in all manner of bodily gratifications risk-free. That, it seems, is what the Galatians thought freedom looked like. But Paul writes to correct them, as Paul is so good at doing, and to realign their faith in a couple of ways. First, Paul says that the requirements of Jewish law are a form of slavery, not freedom. Then he argues that the self-indulgent way that the Galatians have been exercising this freedom violates the only law that in fact does govern, which is to love your neighbor. For freedom Christ has set us free means that Christ set the Galatians free from Jewish law. Furthermore, the Jewish law does not govern them, Paul says. The Spirit does. And furthermore, this freedom is not license to indulge your every desire. It is, in fact, freedom to dedicate your life to the one and only law: love your neighbor. Now, it's not easy to preach on Paul for me, but I actually think Paul is making a really important point here, that freedom is at the heart of our faith, and as people of faith, we must know what freedom is, what it looks like, what it sounds like. But Paul himself has trouble elaborating on what freedom is. He writes as if he knows what freedom is, but then he spends a lot of time and energy telling us what freedom is not. The list of sins that enslave is almost twice as long as the list of spiritual fruits. And not only that, it's quite concrete. Right? Fornication, idolatry, drunkenness. These all call up images in our mind. Images we don't call up when we're in church. But they call up images in our mind. But the words that Paul uses to describe the spiritual fruits are quite vague. Kindness, faithfulness, peace. Paul is really not that successful when it comes to helping us picture what freedom looks like. What acts manifest it. Paul knows what freedom is not, but it seems he does not know precisely what freedom is. This seems about right. I mean, in the history of the world, what man has ever gotten freedom right? No, there weren't enough laughs there, so I should say I meant man in a general sense. Humankind. When in our struggle for freedom have we ever gotten it right? We have 2,000 years of history since St. Paul as evidence that we talk God's freedom, but we walk our own counterfeit version. Is this not the perfect introduction to an American history textbook? 1,700 years after Paul, Thomas Jefferson made his own argument and invoked God's freedom to convince the American colonists that under British rule, they were living under slavery, not freedom. Those were his words, slavery, not freedom. This Thursday, we will celebrate this national attempt to call down and secure for ourselves God's freedom. Yet American freedom was never God's freedom. It was, and still is, man's counterfeit version. On the first July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was read aloud in public squares across the 13 colonies. Imagine the exultant tones of that reading. Imagine the cheers wafted from town squares all the way over to the plantations, where the hundreds of thousands of black slaves would have heard it mixed with the sounds of their chains. Doubled over in the hot July sun, picking weeds in the cotton rows, the overseers whip in their peripheral vision, in their mind's eye, the memory of children taken from them and sold off to another plantation. Did the Declaration sound like freedom to them? No. Was this, for them, freedom's song? No. Not if they turned their chairs around, not if they heard every second of it on repeat. Our Declaration carried not one note of freedom for the slaves. The great Frederick Douglass escaped the tuneless song of slavery and went on to become the voice of the abolitionist movement. And on our 76th 4th of July, Douglass gave a rousing speech that condemned the evils of slavery. Americans, he said, the existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism a sham, your humanity a base pretense, and your Christianity a lie. Alluding to Paul, Douglass calls the church to task for teaching that we ought to obey man's law above God's law. The church in America got it wrong, just like the church in Galatia got it wrong. Even here, man's freedom has been a perversion of God's freedom. Even here, we have the counterfeit version, and what's worse, the counterfeit version has been passed by the church, was passed by the church for hundreds of years. Wrap your mind, if you can, around this astonishing statement of the church's complicity in slavery, uttered by the abolitionist theologian Albert Barnes. Barnes proclaimed, there is no power outside the church that could sustain slavery for 1 hour if it were not sustained within the church. How will we ever know God's freedom when even the church passes counterfeit? Paul gives us a start in addressing this problem. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Notice Paul does not say, for our freedom, for your freedom, Christ has set us free. He says, for freedom, like generally, to call the thing itself into existence in the world. Christ liberated us so that we would be liberated, yes. But that's only the beginning of the story. We can't just grill some burgers, light up some sparklers, and thank God for our good fortune. Because here's the thing about freedom. It doesn't exist for any of us until it exists for all of us. No one is free when others are oppressed. Jesus liberated us so that, liberated, we would liberate others. The purpose of freedom is freedom. The purpose of our freedom is someone else's freedom. This truth is embedded in the central stories of our faith. The Gospel of John says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. Jesus offers eternal life. He looses the chains that tie us to sin, weakness, and death. The promise that bodily death is not the end is designed to embolden us to overcome the fears that get between us and radical love for others. As human beings, we naturally fear death. And this fear can make us selfish, cautious, pragmatic, complacent. But Jesus conquered death, inviting us to tear down the wall of fear and carry forward the standard of freedom. The promise that death will not end us is supposed to endow us with the radical courage to do as Jesus did, to devote ourselves to those who suffer. The crucifixion and the resurrection are mysteries and miracles. But I believe this is what they mean. I think that's the whole point. Jesus absorbed the risk of death, freeing us to live lives of radical service to others. The title of that Frederick Douglass speech was "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" This year, on our 243rd 4th of July, we have to ask, what to the refugee on our southern border is the 4th of July? What do fireworks look like to the refugee mother who, like the slave mother before her, watched her child taken away from her and given to someone else? What does our national anthem sound like to the children screaming from their absent parents, literally betrayed and terrorized by American law? I don't ask these questions lightly. We should not ask these questions lightly. And we must not answer them as Americans, but as Christians. Is there any power outside of the American church that could sustain these injustices for 1 hour if they were not somehow tolerated within the American church? Freedom is Jesus' gift to everyone. You don't have to take my word for it. You don't even have to take Paul's word for it or John's word for it. How about the late, great Curtis Mayfield? People, get ready for the train coming. You don't need no ticket. You just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord. Freedom is God's grace. We don't pay for it, but we have to pay it forward. And we do that just as Paul says we do, by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Because paradoxically, what freedom looks like, what it sounds like, is service to others. It looks like leaving water out for thirsty migrants, even though you risk arrest doing so. It sounds like the chants of the Reverend William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, trespassing on the North Carolina State House, asking for sane legislation to end poverty and address failing healthcare system. It looks like our own Bill Thomas, standing up to become the first openly gay pastor to be ordained in the Pacific Southwest region. And if you've lost touch with the courage it takes to be Bill, take a look at the hateful comments he gets on his blog and the compassionate comments that he leaves in reply. Freedom sounds like the Sunday morning voices at the Little White Chapel, where all are welcome is not a tagline, it is in our every act of worship. It looks like making eye contact with your homeless neighbor and having a little conversation, whether or not you have money to give, knowing that you can restore some of the human dignity that the streets strip away. When we do these things, we let freedom ring. When we do these things, we cut away a link in someone's chain, and our spirit says to their spirit, get ready, there's a train coming. It's free.